What is going on, everyone? Tim from Tierfon Orbital. So today is going to be a relatively quick walkthrough demo video on an install commission that I completed on a Jawas Junkyard red harvest. So this hilt came to me after it was given the Astoria treatment, right? This was weathered and not modified, but it was very, very nicely weathered by Austin over at Astoria Workshop. I, in particular, really love this like hammered metal look that he did on the pommel. Hopefully this is coming out on the pommel and the back of the grip here. But yeah, Austin always does really, really unique weathering work. So this came to me after it was with Austin, and then I did an install on it. So I do want to talk about how to use this hilt. There are some intricacies with this hilt that I want to go over. I also installed this hilt with not the acrylic chassis. So Leon asked me to design a chassis for the run of this hilt when it was initially announced. Leon's intention was to have the chassis printed in a clear acrylic. This chassis is not that chassis. This chassis is a regular PLA chassis that I've designed that's got some accent windows on the side to take advantage of this skeletal look of the hilt, right? However, it is still a small chassis. There is not a lot of real estate in this hilt, so it was not easy to design a chassis for, a working chassis. So there are some intricacies to take into account when using this hilt. Okay, so I want to talk about all of that. We're not going to come into Fusion and talk about the chassis. It's a very, very simple chassis. However, I do want to come up top and talk about how to use it. All right, so with all that out of the way, let's come up top. All right, so here it is. This is the Jawas Junkyard Red Harvest. Okay, as I mentioned to Austin for some weathering, but prior to coming to me, and it looks really, really awesome. Okay, so let's talk about this hilt a little bit, right? Because there are a few things to take into account when using this hilt. Okay, so first of all, switches, right? I appreciate that there are spring plunger switches in this build. However, not only with this one in particular, but the red harvests that I've seen in the past, because first of all, there's just not a lot of material in the walls where these switches are to get like long switches. Okay, so first off, the throw on the switches it's not a lot, right? There's just not a lot of travel on these switches. And unfortunately, what can happen, what I've noticed with this version and a couple of other ones that I've had in the past, these switch hats can come unscrewed quickly. Okay, in fact, they came unscrewed, like they popped out numerous times during the filming of this demo. So another thing that happened with this one in particular, what I think happened when these switches were weathered, the threading on the inside of these switches was shortened, right? Because of whichever weathering process was done to the switches, the threads were a little bit messed up, right? So the limited travel that the switches had by that, unfortunately. So just what I'm saying is, as a caveat and as a warning to the customer of this hilt, just be aware of these switches. These hats will come unscrewed. In fact, I would not be surprised if they come unscrewed during this up top demo video, right? So there's not a lot of travel to begin with, unfortunately, with these switches, and that's just something that you have to watch out for, okay? I just wanted to get that disclaimer out there before we continued any further. Another thing that I noticed was the set screw for the blade, right? The set screw for the blade is hidden underneath this emitter ring, okay? The set screw is too long, so we'll go over this when I tighten down the blade, or I put the blade in. So right now, that set screw is threaded all of the way in past the threads for this ring, and it's just about to end and go inside the emitter. But you have to thread it in all the way, otherwise it's going to get caught up on these threads for this ring. So just another thing to be aware of, right? And I'll go over that a little bit more when we put a blade in it, right? I'm trying to think of what else. It really sounds like I'm complaining about this hilt, and I'm not. There's just a few things to be aware of when you are using it, okay? The pommel on this hilt is held in place with a set screw that's around back here. This pommel, if you are not tightening down this set screw enough, this pommel will be loose, and it will affect the way the chassis is resting inside of the hilt, and the switches will not touch the tactile switches on the chassis itself, right? So be aware of that, but also don't strip this screw. try your best not to strip it. Otherwise, you'll never get the chassis out, and vice versa, you'll never get it in, right? So I'm going to take that screw out. On the bottom of this pommel, there is a custom piece that pushes that chassis up into the hilt to keep it secure, right? So be aware of that. That just stays and lives inside of the hilt. Here is the chassis. This chassis is tiny. I think this might be one of the tiniest chassis that I've done. One of the things that I mentioned was that the real estate in this hilt is just non-existent, right? So there's just not a lot of room to have any kind of play with greebly work, etc. So I did my best to get some 2020 NeoPixel strips in here, but these are really, I mean, the walls in this chassis are very thin. It's a very small chassis. Okay, we've got a 22 millimeter Nano Elite speaker down here from Smugglers Outpost. The PCB emitter is from KR Sabers, and there's our little tiny baby battery tray. All right, and Proffie V3 build in this one. On the side of the chassis are those brass tactile switches. This is what makes a connection to those spring plungers on the outside of the hilt. All right. So for this build, this takes a protected button top 18350. Now these are very particular size of 18350 that are shorter than the ones we usually see in builds. These are shorter than the ones I usually use. They're a little bit lower of a milliamp hour, but that was the only battery size that I could use to give myself enough clearance to get a Proffie in here, a battery, and a speaker, right? So that was the compromise that I had to make when designing this chassis. So to the customer, I will include this battery with your hilt. I will send this when I ship you your hilts in a couple of days, okay? So spring side is your negative. Yeah, listen, designing this chassis, like full disclosure, full transparency, this was not a fun chassis to design. It was not a fun hilt to design a chassis for. So there's just a lot of things that I had to switch up with my chassis design work to make all of this work, right? And that's not just this one. That was the stock one that came, the acrylic one that came with the hilt. It wasn't a fun one for me. Anyway, so spring side is towards your speaker. Take the flat part of your battery, put it in that battery tray. So there are those two 2020 NeoPixel strips on each side of the chassis, okay? So small, such a small hilt. So when putting this chassis into the hilt, battery is going to be pointing towards these spines, okay? So slide your battery. Oh, another thing that I noticed about this hilt, okay? So with previous versions of this hilt, there was a screw that protruded just into the internal cavity of the hilt itself. And I used that as a guide for the chassis to keep the chassis clocked. This hilt does not have that. And I'm not sure if that was a part of the weathering process again, or if this was because of just this particular one that came stock. So there's no screw that is going to guide and clock this chassis. So keep that in mind. You want to put your chassis in so that those switches are on each side to line up with these switches. Push your hilt all the way in until it stops, all right? And then you want to put your pommel in place. Now make sure your pommel is pushed all the way in. Whoops. Okay, make sure your pommel is pushed all the way in. You can go ahead and tighten that screw that is going to hold that pommel in place. Okay. You're good to go. All right. So there's those 2020 strips under there for a little bit of accent. I like these switches. I mean, See, they're just, you really got to watch out with these switches. I'm going to be very careful because honestly, if one of these hats pops off and you lose that spring, it's going to render this whole switch assembly completely unusable. You can buy other springs. In fact, I have springs here. But I would just be aware of that, okay? I'm going to be really careful, honestly. Because these, like again, like these switches, they popped out numerous times during this install. So I don't want to lose them here. I have a carpet on the floor, a rug on the floor. And if they go into that rug, they'll be gone forever. Let's come down to the bottom. All right, so here is that. I mean, it is a very cool looking hilt. It does sound like I'm complaining a little bit, but as an installer, I've got to talk about my experience. You know what I mean? Like I got to talk about what I go through. So here is that, you know, exposed skeletal look of the hilt. I do like that. I think it looks really good. I think Austin did a really awesome job with the weathering on this one. Again, this hammered, like these two hammered pieces, really, really awesome idea to do that. I've never seen that before, right? So. All right, so let's try to put a blade in it. So here is that ring at the top of the hilt, okay? Underneath this ring, I'm actually going to just completely remove this thing. Underneath this ring, there is a set screw right here. If I were to put a blade in this hilt, this is a 7/8 inch blade holder, by the way. Let me back that set screw out. If I were to put a blade in this hilt and then tighten this set screw, okay, even though that set screw is all of the way down, it's still poking out into these threads. This is a short, very short set screw as it is. This is like a 1 millimeter high set screw. I also didn't get a set screw with this hilt. I don't know where that is, but so I won't be able to put this on now. This will not thread past that set screw. So I don't know if they sell 1/2 millimeter set screw, M3 set screws or not, but that is also something to take into account when using this hilt. And that, you know, it's just something to keep in mind. I'm going to be really, listen, I really do not want to lose these switches. So anyway, I'm going to turn the lights off. So we've got our blade in, we've got our set screw in. Once you've got all that done, and you're not going to put this on, you're ready to go. It is really interesting holding, I'm being so careful with this hilt. It is really interesting holding something so small. I wonder what a full-size, actually I probably wouldn't even use a full-size blade in this. Let's see what else we put on here. I'm going to be really careful. It is a cool feeling hilt. I don't even want to clash this thing. Honestly, I don't want to lose these switches. Okay. So that is it. That is the Red Harvest from Jawas Junkyard. Very, very unique, gnarly looking hilt. I get like scorpion or spider vibes from this thing. I mean, I'm sure it's based on a character that I'm very ignorant about. But anyhow, to the customer, thank you very much for your repeat business. I say this time and time again, how grateful I am for folks that come back. That means a lot to me. So thank you very much for coming back to me for my services. I will be getting this in the mail along with your other hilts in the coming days. If anyone has any questions about this particular chassis or anything really, or this install, please do not be a stranger. I have been getting a couple of requests for a chassis, for this chassis. So after this video, I will likely just be adding that to my online chassis index if anyone is interested, right? So anyhow, that's all I got. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. And with that being said, may the force be with you always. Have a good one, everybody.